Hello and welcome to Bleeding Tree Gaming. My name's Amy, aka Warpfiend, and in this video I'm back to tackling some more Star Wars Shatterpoint. So I haven't tackled any of the wonderful Atomic Mass game sculpt from either Marvel Crisis Protocol or Star Wars Shatterpoint in a while. Due to the health problems I've been having, I've been improving lately though, and I have several commissions waiting to go, so let's crack on with one. As you can see, I've already base coated Anakin here, just because I was playing around off camera trying to get an idea of what to do with him. I'll cover the colours I used as I get to each section. So first off, I'm going to tackle the brown robes. I base coated these in Rhinox hide, and the highlight colours I'll be using are Scrag Brown and Sunny Skin Tone. I'm going to be talking a bit about painting different finishes in this video, and the part I'm starting with is this very matte woolen robe. To show that the highlights are going to be less prominent, the Scrag Brown highlight I apply over the raised parts. It's not particularly light. The highlights will only get brighter than this on the edge highlights that I apply. I keep those edge highlights as fine as possible. I'm going to glaze them back to make sure they're nice and integrated without sticking out like a sore thumb. This is because matte material doesn't reflect a great deal of light, so I'm mostly using highlights just to emphasize those edges and bring some definition to the surface. This is going to contrast with the glossy tabard that he wears over his robes, which I'm choosing to render in this dark blue. I base it in Payne's Grey, a nice desaturated colour, as both the extreme shadow and extreme highlights of a reflective fabric like this will tend not to display a lot of saturation. The saturation is going to be reserved for the mid-tones, where enough light is reflected to show the colour of the material, but not so much that the reflection is going to wash out all the colour. I use some dark Prussian blue for the mid-tone and highlight up by mixing in dark ivory. Notice how with glossy surfaces I'm not just edge highlighting. To properly represent this kind of material you need to actually paint in those light reflections. The easiest way of doing that is to roughly sketch out some areas that you think would be receiving the most light. Here for example the shoulders, the upper part of this crease, and a band across the width of this dangling section. Once you've sketched them out, it's just a matter of blending them into the rest of the material. It's important when doing this not to completely obliterate that highest level of highlight. There needs to be that pale desaturated section where the reflection of the light is intense enough to conceal the actual blue colour of the material. This is how you represent a nice glossy finish. Next up, I'm going to handle a lot of details that are either greys or metallic, and I want to continue this conversation about different finishes by showing how to differentiate between the two while using a very similar palette. So the trousers and the gloves, I want to start from a black, and I'm going to give a few layer highlights with some Pro Acryl brown grey. As the leather surface I'm aiming for is not quite as matte as the wool robe would appear, I'm pushing those layer highlights a little further than I did for the matte wool, but nowhere near as much as I pushed them on the glossy tabard. Then I can start mixing in some dark ivory to get some of those regular edge highlights in. Metal, on the other hand, is a highly reflective surface, so I want to heavily weight the tones at the higher end of the brightness spectrum. I'm not going to use the brown grey in the mid-tones this time, but just solely mix those black and ivory paints to get all the shades that I need. I'm not going for super realistic NMM on this, as the metallic parts are all fairly small sections, but what I can easily do to differentiate these from the grey fabric is to start from very near my brightest shade, the pure dark ivory, and apply some gradients down into a mid-tone grey. Notice I'm not using that black anywhere, although I will blackline the deepest recesses to add in some contrast, but for a polished metal surface you're more likely to be relying on the upper half of the brightness scale to really sell that highly reflective finish. Next up is painting the face, and I don't have a great deal to say about this that fits in with my theme of different finishes, so I'll just say that it's a simple scheme in Pro Acryl, Dark Flesh, Beige Red and Dark Ivory with some Vallejo Sunny skin tone. The last major part to paint is the hair, so I'll quickly talk about this and then we can tie together all this talk of reflections and finishes with some nice simple OSL from the lightsaber. Now, hair is an interesting surface to paint as you're generally painting it two ways. The light reflection is quite strong and you paint this separate to the individual strands of hair. In this case we have a figure with a front to back parting, and the light reflections are going to run parallel to that parting, but the direction of the hair itself runs perpendicular to it. This is one of those places where reference materials really help if you're unsure. So take a look at hair dye bottles, shampoo commercials, where they tend to show models with really glossy hair. This will help you to build up those light reflections. So remember what I talked about on the tabard, make sure the reflections are covering a wide enough area to really represent that glossiness. The second part of this is to add in those hair strands. As I built up each level of highlight on the hair, I made sure to break up the edges with some parallel thin brush strokes to represent the actual hairs. I want as many of these as possible, keeping them very fine, but don't stray too far away from the matching section of highlight. For instance, don't do hair strands on the darkest segment of hair with your brightest colour, as it's probably going to look out of place. You're also not trying to paint every single strand of hair, but just enough of the fine lines to break up the edges of your layer highlights and suggest the texture of the hair. So having gone through all of the different materials on the model and how they reflect light differently, we have some solid rules to apply OSL accurately across the piece. I like to paint these sabres simply, a quick coat of Pro Acryl dark turquoise, followed by a thin glaze of dark ivory, pulling the pigment towards the hilt of the lightsaber where it would be brightest. The trick now is going to be integrating that dark turquoise into the colours of the pieces being lit by it, and highlighting them with the same finish qualities as the rest of that material. So for instance, the dark blue shiny tabard, I mix the dark turquoise into the brighter highlight colours and keep that high level of reflectivity with a wide band that's receiving light from the sabre. It's kind of subtle obviously on the blue surface, but on the brown, for example, that colour from the light will be way more obvious. Remember that particularly on the low reflectivity surfaces, such as the face, that blue won't be showing through strongly if there's a brighter ambient light source. That's why the side of the face that the blue light will be hitting is shadowed, and if you'll notice, the sculpt is actually designed so that this could easily be the case. You know, it's kind of leaning forward, and yeah, there's not a lot of light from above hitting. So think of all those dramatically lit villains in movies or comics, and make sure there's a ring of darkness surrounding the coloured glow from the OSL. Finally, as I integrate that light into the hair, remember that each individual hair is transparent, and so flashes of that blue light will be drawn up further than you'd expect them to. A few simple strands of blue mixed with the hair colour will help reflect this. So I'm going to cut to the beauty shots in a minute. I hope you found this little talk about finish and reflectivity interesting, and I'd love to hear how you use this information in your own pieces. You can really add a great deal of life and definition to a model by just applying these simple rules. Feel free to ask me any questions in the comments, and if you want any feedback on your models, why not join our Discord? You can find the link in the description. We have a friendly crowd of hobbyists, so please drop in. Thanks very much for watching. I've been Amy and this has been Bleeding Tree Gaming, and we will see you in the next one. Bye bye!